Matthew Patrick, MB, welcome to Let's Talk Money, and thank you so much for joining us. Matthew, I'd like to start by talking about that wonderful day when it was the first appearance of the Leader of the Opposition in PMQs. And once she and the Prime Minister had finished their to and fro, the first question was asked by you. And I think we really need to find out how you managed to do that. But you asked a question about a lady called Emily who'd been the victim of financial abuse. And then I thought you got a really good answer from the Prime Minister. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Of course. So I first came across Emily's story when I was working with the charity Surviving Economic Abuse, who do so much important work in this area. And when I got, you have to put in for a ballot to get a question to the Prime Minister. And so my name
Right.
came out of the ballot. I knew immediately that I wanted to ask about this topic. So I went straight to Surviving Economic Abuse. We'd previously talked about testimony that they'd had from survivors, and Emily's story had come to me, and I wanted to share that with the Prime Minister. They gave me all the details, and they got me permission from Emily for me to be able to do that. And I mean, the story, I mentioned it in PMQs, but it's harrowing, Ray. She's in a
Yeah.
relationship with someone, and the abuse got so severe that she had to leave their joint home. And he wasn't done with the abuse there. He stopped he stopped any mortgage payments that he was meant to be making. And she was having to pay, obviously, to stay in accommodation to keep her safe. And in the end, the only thing that could happen for her was a repossession of the house to end that mortgage. And when you imagine the horror that she's gone through in that relationship, and then you imagine the distress caused by leaving, I mean, extraordinary to leave that relationship and the difficulty she went through in that period.
Yeah.
I felt quite, if I'm honest, I felt quite angry on her behalf
Yeah.
that even after all of that, she now has to wrestle with a credit score that means she can't take out a mobile phone contract. And I use my
Right.
mobile phone too much, frankly. But it's integral to almost everything I do. And what an awful thing to hold people back after they've managed to leave such an abusive relationship. It left me feeling angry, so that's why I asked the Prime Minister.
Yeah. Well, I have to say that when we've interviewed victims of financial control, we're left angry as well, and we're left very sad. And actually, I'm just confused by how it's allowed to happen, and I think you are too. So one of the things that I thought the Prime Minister's reply to you was excellent, and he offered you a meeting with the relevant minister. What do you think can be done? What more can be done? What more should be done?
I think it's a huge question because I think an awful lot needs to be done, in all honesty, because it goes beyond economic abuse. It goes straight to the heart of this government's quite ambitious mission to halve violence against women and girls in a decade.
Yeah.
And that truthfully, Ray, you need all of government. And I know that already we've put together a team comprising of people from all different departments, Home Office, education, health service, everywhere, because this isn't in isolated to one department. And I think that's everything from preventing this stuff, right? That's better education in our schools and better way we talk about and treat women.
Yeah.
It's about the police being better equipped to spot this abuse, to identify these perpetrators, to take them down, the courts to see them face justice, and also about better support afterwards as well. Like, as I say, Emily's story, she needs to be in a better position. So for that piece, it requires so much. But
Yeah.
I actually have some confidence we can make progress. And let me just say this as well. It's not just the government and departments. It's got to be the banks, it's got to be charities, it's got to be
Right.
all of us.
Right. Well, we're four square behind you and everything you've said there. It's just these seem like massive efforts that are needed to put these things right. And many of the victims of financial control we've spoken to have had problems because they've been nonplussed by what was possible by their abusive partner, who actually said things to them like, "We are going to destroy you." And we being me and the banks and everyone else, because I know they're on my side. And we had one victim who had to sit through family court without any help whatsoever when her partner was able to appoint a barrister because her partner had the money and she was on her own and she felt she didn't even get help from the judge. So it's actually a sea change that is needed in everything that affects these victims. And it seems like a massive task, and it's fantastic that someone with enthusiasm is taking it on. Do you see it as legislation that is needed to put some of these things right, or is it new institutions? Or, as you say, is it actually a new education for the financial institutions that are always part of this abuse?
On economic abuse, I think there can be a route, but actually, in the first instance, when I speak to banks, Ray, I hear a lot of goodwill of people wanting to do the right thing by these survivors. I think TSB have something called a flea fund, where if you're leaving a relationship that's abusive, obviously sometimes you don't have the money to do so all the time. And I know surviving economic abuses research suggested that 1 million women didn't leave abusive relationships because of the economic abuse they were facing. But I come back to TSB, that bank's flea fund is £500. And if you leave, you can apply for that support. And when I met with them, one of the things I found quite striking as well is that they said so often, in almost all cases, it's about half of that is applied for. So
Mhm.
when people leave in desperate situations, sometimes they're not thinking, oh, give me that 500 and I'll just spend it to get through this. They're thinking about the very minimum that they need to get out of that relationship. So the reason for me mentioning that is there are different approaches taken by banks, but fundamentally, the conversations I'm having are demonstrate to me that the banks in this actually do think this isn't good enough, do think we need to get a better solution. The question then is how we do that and how we do that in a joined up way. And that's something I'm hoping the government can support us in delivering.
But how much of this is known by victims of financial abuse? Where do they go to get information?
I think that's a really good point as well, is that I don't think it is always known. There is support available. I spoke with my constituencies Wirral West, and I spoke with a survivor of abuse just a couple of weeks ago. But her story, not dissimilar to so many, but she was left with about £5,000 worth of debt. And
Right.
the citizens' advice on the Wirral were extraordinary. They gave such support that meant actually that debt has now been wiped off. And there are charities doing incredible work. I mentioned surviving economic abuse, I mentioned citizens' advice. There are banks that, from the conversations I'm having, demonstrate organisations that want to go further and provide that support. So I suppose a really important message for any people who I find themselves in that situation now or know someone that's in that situation is if you ask for help, there are organisations that can do that.
Right. And I totally endorse what you said about citizens' advice because we've had a case history where somebody was really having problems with the accommodation because she was lied to by I think the landlord as well as the abuser, and she just spoke to the citizens' advice, who then immediately spoke to the landlord and sorted it out and said, no, you can't do that. That's not legal. So she was just lucky that she went to the right person in Citizens Advice who had the answer. We keep finding this, that it's almost by chance that people find that there is a way out of some of the things that they're suffering from in terms of economic abuse. Should there be, I suppose Citizens Advice is always somewhere that people could go to, but should there be another almost standard port of call to help these victims?
I think what I'd like to see is when you have to interact with anybody on such a horrible issue. So let's say it's the police, and the police need to come to your house because of a situation of abuse. I would like to see them in that moment able to support you with a referral to help you get in touch with whether it's Citizens Advice, Surviving Economic Abuse, whether it's any of these charities that do great work, Refuge as well. I think there is so much that is available to people, but unless they know about it, Ray, understandably, they're not going to access it. So I think
No.
part of this isn't about introducing new things per se. I'm not saying that's not something we should look at, but when we have these helplines available, when we have these charities there, the challenge is, I think, a few things. One is letting people know about them.
Yes.
Um, and then two is helping them understand that they're going to be believed and supported, because I think sometimes there's a hopelessness when you're in these situations
Yeah.
that nothing can get better. So why would you bother?
Yeah.
And I then get to have a conversation with someone who's been helped by one of these charities, and it's incredible. And I think it's more than they thought would be possible. But
Yeah.
there are people out there to help, and I suppose I really want to make sure that whenever you come into contact with someone in the state or not, and you're in that situation, that someone knows you can seek support and seek help.
Well, as an MP, you obviously have a bit of a platform to be able to talk about these things, and I think that's really, really important. And I guess one of the obvious places that a victim will go to is their local MP of whatever party. But do you think, Matthew, that every MP in the country has the right kind of information?
Probably not, actually. And I think we were speaking just before this podcast about the flurry of emails that you get as a member of parliament
Yeah,
about a whole range of things, everything from understandable things. They want you to attend a debate in the Houses of Parliament. They'd like you to attend a drop-in and a reception. They'd like a meeting. They'd like you to set out the kind of a policy response on issues. That's before you've done anything in the constituency. And
yeah,
I think what you find then is there's a lot of people that probably get these issues. And I actually think most of my colleagues would feel quite content to think, I should send a note here to Citizens Advice. We've got support here as well we can reach out to. But in terms
yeah.
of whether instinctively they would know, I don't think that is the case. And I think there probably is more work to be done to make sure that people, so that MPs know, so that we can just say it in conversation, so that councillors know, so that the police know, that the health service knows, because there are, of course, routes you can take where you have a conversation and you come across someone who is clued up. And that is an amazing moment because they might help you straight away. They are brilliant at signposting you, they can support you. But it's also true that you might go through the health service and through the police, and sometimes to the police directly on your own behalf and through the courts, and never feel like you've had this support. So
Right.
raising awareness of this and making sure that support is more broadly known is important.
Well, I think you've actually hit the crucial point there, and we've interviewed people that have have not known where to go, or at least when they had the problem, they didn't know who to approach, and they didn't get any advice, and they just suffered. And sometimes when you have a financial issue, you're never going to get it back because afterwards it's too late. You needed the information a little bit earlier before things were finalised. Um, Maybe there's a opportunity for some kind of cross-party agreements on this. So someone like you who can, who's got you've got a passion for actually sorting out these problems, and you're getting all the information, and you know what advice to give. And maybe that could be shared with every MP so that when anyone approaches their local MP, they get the right kind of support. It's that kind of consistency of knowing that, hey, there's somewhere that's going to help me, which is what they would hope for. And maybe you're the guy to do it.
Do you know, Ray, I am genuinely blessed to be with so many incredible colleagues who have expertise, have experience and professional experience in this area, and I learn from them each and every day. And I think I've sat in debates in the chamber and heard people from all parties make the most incredible speeches about their commitment, about their understanding, and
Yeah.
sometimes about harrowing experience. And I, you're right. This is for me. I have no interest in this being a party political issue. I
No.
have only interest in us getting a solution. I think part of bringing people together, I hosted for Economic Abuse Awareness Day a couple of
Okay.
months ago. I hosted an event with Surviving Economic Abuse. We had some of the banks there, we had the FCA there, but we had a number of MPs and Lords come as well. And I think, I mean, many of the people there themselves were experts, but I know other colleagues who care about this and want to go further in their work came to learn more. And I can't mention that event without, praising. I heard from ministers from Treasury and from the Home Office talk about their commitment, which was brilliant. And I heard from charity leaders, which is brilliant. And then there was a speech at the end from one of the survivors. And I don't know if I have permission to share her name, so I won't. But
Okay.
that speech was so powerful and raw, and it laid bare any idea that sometimes the people behind this abuse are of a certain background, or you could just tell that who they were. That this woman spoke about a partner that came into her life and took her properties from her, and he operates. He's very successful, financially successful. No one would assume this in a million years, and I think that was quite a stark moment as well to hear that. So I didn't want to mention that event that we did in Parliament without paying tribute to her for that incredible
Right.
speech.
Right. And it's always individuals, isn't it? Inspirational individuals who, despite what they've suffered, are the ones that actually stand up and actually are there to help others.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that the Prime Minister mentioned when he responded to you was the involvement of businesses. Do you think that's important? Because there are fantastic chambers of commerce everywhere, in your area and then all over the country, and they're often great conduits to be able to get to businesses and help everyone understand that there is this problem out there and how they could assist when things are going wrong.
I knew that I wasn't going to regret doing this podcast, but one of the reasons I am confident now I won't regret it is I hadn't thought of that. It's a really good idea, and if I'm able to do so while we're on this, I'm going to make a note for myself to write to my local Chamber of Commerce to ask this very thing, which is there any additional support that they need to let business owners know about the support available? Because it makes obviously it's the right thing to do morally, but it will make sense for these business people as well to make sure that their teams that work for them are supported and know how to access that. I've already I don't want to assume that the only way to sort this is through legislation and through this place.
No.
I think it goes far beyond that, and so I've what I'm trying to do as well is see whether we can link up some of the work done by banks, some of really impressive work done by banks to better identify this stuff, this abuse, better provide support. Whether that could be linked up with any services, so locally with councils and they themselves do good work. Why not bring together best practice from
Yes.
all the organisations that are making headway in this space, so that those who maybe don't have the funds to invest in research and understand this stuff in more detail can actually learn directly from those that do. And um, I think that point then about joining up all parts of society in tackling this is one well made.
Well, we have good relationships with a couple of big chambers of commerce in the north, and they have great relationships with every other chamber in the country. So we're absolutely behind you in anything you try to do. One last thing before we close, you mentioned something which I think is very important. You mentioned schools, and we started this program to increase financial literacy, especially amongst women and young girls, amongst everyone, young people generally. And we think it's so important. And it always, I have 3 children and 6 grandchildren, and I know it's so easy that when you leave school, no one at school has taught you to be a person. How do you live as a citizen? What do all these things mean? What's tax, Dad? You know, why do I have to pay these rates? All these financial issues are quite important, but just an understanding of what money means to you as an individual as you go through your life. So we're also producing a series of books for nursery kids. So we believe it starts there, and we want schools to adopt a better agenda of improving financial literacy with their kids. What do you think about that?
I agree with that. I think it's a good point. I know I'm thinking now to the work that Martin Lewis has been doing in trying to improve financial education amongst younger people. It's really important, and you know, actually, a lot of people are turning to Instagram and TikTok and Facebook for um, better understanding of mortgage rates and how these are constructed, of interest and how it can compound. And there's actually some really good work done on those platforms to better understand this. But actually, in a school where you can then have a conversation with your teachers and with your classmates and embed that learning, I think it's important. And I don't think it happens enough. One of the things as part of that, and it's central to my campaign on this issue, Ray, is I want people who've obviously, in this case, survivors of economic abuse. I want them to be able to get their credit file restored, because it's
Right.
that credit file that often will have, as we heard in Emily's case, you know, terrible situations through no fault of her own that then will mean she's unable to take out credit in the future. And a lot of the work I want to do with the banks is to find a voluntary route where we can really support those survivors. And it comes back to the point you made about better signposting and people knowing what support's available. I think I'd add two more points. One is to say sometimes it's about people realizing that this isn't acceptable. And so that
Yeah.
education piece at school wouldn't just be about teaching you about mortgages and financial services in ways that we should, but I also think it should be very clear that someone coming in and taking control of your money and your property and then controlling what you can do with it isn't acceptable. And that's got to be part of the learning piece. And if we're able to do that, my hope would be then that more people would better understand what is right and what shouldn't happen. They can better access the support that is available. And if I can make progress with colleagues on helping to restore the credit files for survivors of economic abuse, then they'll have that route as well. And if we achieve those things, that'll be a small step, but hopefully a really important one for people who, like
Yeah.
Emily, have gone through hell and back.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, we've come to the end of our time, so I can't thank you enough for spending that time with us today. I totally agree with everything you say. You've been quite inspiring, and you certainly got our full support. So, Matthew Patrick, MP, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much.